Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the evening's entertainment. My name is Stavros Yanuka. I'm the Chief Executive of the World Innovation Summit for Education, an initiative of the Qatar Foundation and a partner of the Raisina Dialogue. I'm here to moderate and host a panel discussion on the Chrome Age and what we need to do to prepare ourselves economically for the rise of the machines, not to put too fine a point to it. We have here a truly outstanding panel. I will not go into a lengthy introduction of each of the panelists. I believe they're well known, and if you can always find out more about them from the very well crafted program book. What we're going to do is begin by asking our panelists to make some opening remarks, to talk about the topic at hand. What I picked up from the opening session from the chairman of the Raisina Dialogue is this idea that technological change is a source of disruption, but he said properly harnessed, it can become a source of growth and opportunity. I would like to think actually that the two are not mutually exclusive, that disruption is almost to a certain extent inevitable. It's an inevitable consequence of change, and it's really about managing that disruption. And that's where perhaps the harnessing comes in. So I would encourage us to think about how, as panelists, how we might navigate this new world. Our curator, in his write-up on this panel, asked the question, how do we make machines, or humans, rather, how do we make humans more compatible with machines? I find that a little too deterministic for my tastes. And so I would encourage us to also think about how do we make machines more compatible with humans. And perhaps we can talk about who's really in the driving seat. I imagine we're still in the driving seat as humans, but are we going to ever get to a point where we may lose control? And finally, the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, I think offered an answer of sorts, and it's an answer that as the CEO of a educational institution, I love to hear, when he said that, look, in the 21st century, essentially, education underpins both hard and soft power. So how do we harness education to help us navigate this new world, the Chrome Age, as our curator has named it? So that's it from me. Let me start first by very quickly introducing our panelists. So to my immediate right, we have Yao Zhang. She is the founder and CEO of Roboterra, an education initiative that utilizes robotics for learning. To her right is the Honorable Jayant Sinha, the Minister of State for Civil Aviation in India. To his immediate right, Gabriela Ramos, the Chief of Staff of the OECD and the Sherpa to the G20. To her right is Joseph Lubin, the co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Consensus, which I believe is, you're in the crypto currency business, so that'll be interesting to hear about.
Excuse me, the blockchain business, not the crypto.
My mistake. So you'll shed some light into that. And then to his right is Manish Sabharwal, co-founder and executive chairman of Team Lease. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So, Minister, perhaps we can start with you.
Thank you very much, Stavros, and a very good evening to my distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. What I will try to do in my short opening remarks is actually to lay out the challenge that we face And because we have a very distinguished and knowledgeable group of fellow panelists, and I'm sure many of you in the room have good ideas as well, I'm sure some solutions, practical solutions, will emerge from the dilemma, the challenge that I will pose for you. But let me tell you what is one of our, if not the most important challenge we are facing, certainly one of the top three. And that is how we are going to be able to provide gainful employment for India's young workforce. Now, the demographics are as follows. For about 20 to 25 years, India has had about 25 million live births a year. So we have a young workforce of about 500 to 600 million people that were born in a time span of about 20 to 25 years. So you know the metaphor of the pig in the python? So when the pig goes through the python, you can see the pig going through the whole system. Well, that's the kind of demographic situation we have in India right now, where we have a very young workforce, which is within a time span of about 20 to 25 years, but there are 506 million of these young people who need to be gainfully employed if our economy has to grow and people have to lead prosperous lives. Now, juxtaposition that demographics with organized employment in India right now. In India, we have a workforce of about 500 million people right now, many of which are this cohort that I just described, the young people, because quite a few of them already in the workforce. But we have a workforce of over 500 million people. Of that workforce, only 21 million right now are in the organized private sector. So they're employed in the organized sector, in private sector employment, only 21 million people. 23.5 million people are employed in government, state, central and local government. So there are more people employed in government than they are in the organized private sector. The rest are in the informal sector. So we really have only somewhere between 45 to 50 million people out of 500 million people, that is between 5 to 10% of our people that are actually in organized employment. And with that as kind of the demographics, let me tell you the politician's dilemma. The politician's dilemma is that young people that are coming of working age or people who are already in the workforce have the expectation that they will find jobs in the organized sector. And as I just explained to you how small the organized sector actually is. And the expectation of most young people who are going to college and our enrollment ratio, Manish will have the exact numbers. What is the exact number of our gross enrollment ratio, Manish? 23%. So a quarter of people are going into our colleges. So if you have about 20 to 25 million people in every cohort in every year, about 5 or 6 million people are going to college. And of those 5 or 6 million people going to college, the expectation that they have and the expectation that their parents have is that they will have some kind of white-collar job. That they will have some kind of white-collar job. It will be a job working in some nice corporate campus where they'll be working on a computer and have a car, and then they'll be driving home to a nice flat in a nice suburb and so on. That's people's expectation. But you have to now juxtaposition that expectation against the fact that we have very, very few organized sector jobs. And that is the central challenge that we face as policymakers, is how do you reconcile the reality of organized sector employment with the expectations that our young people and their parents have. And they have actually in many cases invested quite a bit to actually educate these people. So there is this very strong expectation that they will get a white-collar job, but we just don't have a way of being able to supply it to them under current course and speed in our economy. Now, as we think about this challenge, I am starting to say that our future of organized employment in India is not in mass manufacturing. And in fact, if you look at the traditional development model, the manner in which the West has developed or North Asia, East Asia has developed, it's the classic farm to factory development model, where people get out of agriculture, agriculture becomes much more productive, you move to industry, you move to cities. And that's the farm to factory model of development that has happened around the world. I don't think that's going to work for India. I don't think mass manufacturing is going to work given where we are in the global economy and the future of work and all the things that my distinguished panelists will speak about. So I'm suggesting, and I'll conclude with this, that rather than a farm to factory mass manufacturing model of organized employment, we have to think of a farm to franchise mass services development model, where we find a way in which people can get jobs in services so that whether they are in a small village or in a small town, they get jobs as people working in beauty parlors, as yoga teachers, as DJs in villages, as people coaching people to take exams. But we have to find a way in which through services, we can find gainful employment to all of these young people that are looking for productive work. So we have to find some kind of a farm to franchise model. And I see no reason why we can't have companies like Ola, which are already franchising people to drive cars, companies that are coming up with other large-scale franchising models like our telecom companies, like our financial services companies, why they can't really be the large-scale drivers of employment. I think that is the future, farm to franchise, mass services, and I very much look forward to what my fellow panelists will have to say about this and other ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Gabriela, if I can ask you for your opening thoughts.
Thank you, Stavros, and thank you, Minister, for your initial remarks. Good afternoon. Good night, everybody, and my colleagues, panelists. Well, I'm the OECD. I'm the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and we are known to be the house of best practices and of evidence. So let me just share with you some of the facts as we see them. Because, of course, the digital revolution is a source of great expectations and promise, as the Minister has mentioned, just to change the frameworks. But it's also a source of great fear of not being capable of mastering the pace of change that is being imposed on us. And let me just share with you that past technological progress, it's not only about the technological progress that we are witnessing, but it's also the pace of change that is just so fast, that is overwhelming us. Let me just share with you that the first wave of electricity, to have 25% of the population of the US joining the electrical grid, took 45 years. Telephony took 35 years. It was shorter, but still 35 years, 25%. Computers took 16 years. And the mobile phone only took 4 years. And you know that mobile phone of 5 years ago is another thing. Now we have really real computers in our mobile phone delivering a lot of services. So it's just the pace of change is amazing. The second question that is really becoming a great source of concern for people and for policymakers is how do we anticipate those changes to try to give our people the skills and the capacities to adapt. At the OECD, we have made some calculations that probably 9 to 14% of the jobs as we know them today will just disappear. But 35% of the jobs as we know them will change. And if you think about an architect that studied 30 years ago, it's completely different to what the current architects are really learning with their programs and softwares, and it's completely different. McKinsey says that it's 45%. We don't know. What we know is it's going to change. Therefore, it's another source of concern. But there is another angle that is important, that we know that it's only those that are very well prepared that is going to take advantage of it. At the OECD, we're concerned about the fact that there is a flattening out of the growth of productivity. And then you go for averages. Said, on average, productivity is stagnant. Growth is not as it was before, which is a puzzle, because this is a very rich technological era, and the productivity, you don't see it in the productivity data. But the fact is that if you go granular, you have the leading firms, the platform economy, the service economy that is growing at 3 to 5%, and the rest of the economy that is flat. And if you go for the SMEs or those that are laggard in the world of work, is just the difference is staggering. And this is a real challenge for politicians. How do we make sure that this benefits everybody together? and not opening another digital divide for many people, but also for women that is also not very well connected with this world of software and hardware. And we know also that 1/3 of the total employment is going to be lost. So the fact is, how do we address all these facts, and how do we move forward into being better prepared? And I think you put it in the skills, but then the policy frameworks, as you mentioned, Minister, and then the global standards. These are the 3 areas that I would propose that we could covering up. Are our education systems well prepared to give our students and the youngsters the capacity to thrive in this very rich technological environment? I doubt it. I doubt it, and we are the house that has produced the PISA report, who is measuring outcomes. It's not only about cognitive skills. We measure maths, literacy, scientific skills. It's not about that only, but even there, we still have a challenge. It's about higher level skills, social-emotional skills, because you need to be very adaptive. You are very well plugged into a very globalized economy, so you need to know global issues. So you need global competencies, which is not easy to track or to change or to. This is one of the challenges that we're facing. The second one, I think that the minister mentioned it in some form. Are the labor markets well prepared for this pace of change? No, because the entitlements, the social protection systems, the active labor market policies are linked to a job. They're not linked to a person. How do we make all these entitlements linked to a person? Because the person is going to be changing jobs. So you don't protect jobs, you protect the person. And this is one of the challenges. And the third issue is global standards. How do we manage data? What's the governance of big data? How do we make sure that data that is produced by the big platforms is also shared by everybody? Because what is happening is that you are confronting in the future the fact that there are some very big companies that are producing and using the data to feed the next artificial intelligence production, and then the rest will just be looking very nicely from the fence. So I think these are very great challenges that we need to confront, and policymakers have something to do, business sector has something to do, and all of us will need to be better prepared to deal with these challenges. Thank you.
Joseph, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I've been a technologist, a computer scientist, a software engineer for much of my professional life. In the year 2003, I transitioned into the world of finance and began to manage money and build trading systems. I did voracious reading, lots of research, and soon became disconcerted at the state of the global financial system. So when I continued to trade, and then eventually, as we approached 2007, 2008, I slowed down because things had, in my opinion, started to really go awry. I think trust has been lost over a few decades in centralized infrastructure, especially in the financial industry. So I took a pause and stopped my activities in the financial industry. So that was a little before 2011 when I read a white paper by a person or a group of people named Satoshi Nakamoto describing a new invention, the Bitcoin system. So the Bitcoin system was first an application. It was a money application, a store of value, a payment system. But more profoundly, it was a breakthrough in database technology. It was a way of building IT infrastructure, software systems that were decentralized. Up to that point, every database system, every IT system in the world was essentially centralized and was either very siloed or significantly siloed. So This breakthrough enabled a money system to be built, to be decentralized and therefore trustworthy, a system in which actors could cooperate and compete with one another and be certain that even if up to half the actors on the system were malicious, the system would still work properly. And so that enabled a money system, the first application on blockchain, to be built of the people, by the people, and for the people. And 2012 and subsequent years saw different attempts to bring that technology to any sort of application, any sort of use case. I was part of the formation of a project called Ethereum that enables any average software developer, millions of software developers around the world, to learn the technology, roughly as easy to build on as building a web page or a mobile application, and build decentralized infrastructure. When I read the Bitcoin white paper, it occurred to me that people didn't need to occupy Wall Street anymore, that people didn't need to occupy anything anymore. We could just get busy building better foundational infrastructure for the systems, economic, social, and political systems that run our planet. There are two tremendous value propositions to this technology. The first is that instead of building IT infrastructure that is siloed, that is centrally controlled, that is vulnerable to corrupt CFOs or rogue system administrators or hackers, we can build decentralized infrastructure that can subserve sectors, that can subserve entire industries, that can subserve value chains like supply chains. We are at a sea change in how we build IT infrastructures. The atomic unit of IT infrastructures will be collaborative, and we're going to see better, more transparent, more auditable, more trustworthy infrastructures that will facilitate collaboration in all the things that we do. The second core value proposition is moving our infrastructure into a native digital format. Native digital implies something more profound when you put it on a blockchain. We can move our monetary systems from beads to notches on sticks, to pieces of metal, to pieces of paper, to centralized entries or entries in centralized databases, and they're all roughly the same thing. But if we move that foundational element of society, money, into natively digital form, and we enable machines and people to have control over the money and to move it around without intermediaries, we have a profound tool. So the foundational elements are more than just money. They're identity, there's reputation, there's agreements, there's certificates. All of these things are currently realized in analog or frictional form. They're pieces of paper, they're ink, they're rubber stamps, they are subjectively interpretative rules, they are force, they are incarceration. All of the transactions involving those foundational elements have delays built in. Clearing and settlement involving every one of those elements extends over hours or days or months. When you move money, as we've done already, and as is happening on a national level very soon, when you move money into registries on decentralized infrastructure, whether the public blockchain system or national systems, when you move identity, self-sovereign identity, into native digital form on a public blockchain, when you move legally enforceable hybrid agreements onto a public blockchain, a technology that we have built, where you can escrow money directly into clauses in an agreement and have programmatic clauses act based on conditions being met, when you escrow certificates, as we've done for education and other sorts of uses, when all those things are natively digital, clearing and settlement involving all of those elements can be compressed into the instant of the transaction. As with compounding interest, where value creation events build on one another exponentially, we can move the value creation events in our society much closer together in time, reducing the durations, reducing the frictions. We can create a growth engine that will be astonishing and exponential and bring us into the fourth industrial revolution.
So I think you have to step back. There's so much about productivity and about technology that we've heard. To me, the most interesting question of all times is why our country is poor, right? Now, could it be institutions? Could it be technology? Is it embedded in the air? You know, I went for my MBA to the US in August '94, and by September I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us, why are they richer than us? I mean, clearly I can kick their butt individually, but there's something in the air, whether it's the institutions, it's capital markets, it may be skills, it's embedded in the air, it's really not at the individual level. And that's an important diagnosis of, if poverty is about productivity, then India's at an interesting crossroad, right? Does India have a jobs problem or do we have a wages problem? I think it's important to answer that question, because if you think we have a jobs problem, you'll throw money from helicopters and you'll bust the fisc, right? People are dying, you need to throw. If you have a wages problem, it's more complicated. And I would submit technology actually, even in the US, why are people talking about the Phillips curve sort of unemployment is so low, why aren't wages going up? Technology is having a deflationary effect on wages. But I think it's very important to think about this problem differently in a country that has a per capita income of $45,000 and a country which has a per capita income of $1,500. I think automation, artificial intelligence, big data are very important today for countries at the bleeding edge of productivity. So if you're at $45,000. But you know, in India, so what is the nightmare scenario for a rich country because of automation and big data or artificial intelligence? That half their labor force will produce 12% of their GDP? Well, India's already there, right? I mean, half our labor force produces 12% of our GDP. So I think you have to be very careful in extrapolating, trying to prevent people from falling into poverty, from pulling people out of poverty. I really think that it's important to recognize that our problem is regulatory cholesterol in land and labor markets. Our problem is infrastructure. Our problem is human capital. That may be a very different problem than somebody who's making 45 and is going to make 30. So how do we think about the impact of technology? Obviously, it's an opportunity. The original wave of technology was obviously manufacturing. But, you know, India hasn't been dealt the hand that China was dealt in 1978. I mean, Deng Xiaoping was very skilled, but he was also very lucky, right? He got a 30-year super cycle of global growth, global openness to trade, and global deconstruction of manufacturing supply chains. That's not the hand India's been dealt in 2017. So, you know, one of my favorite professors at the Kennedy School, Ricardo Hausman, says the only predictor of sustained economic success is economic complexity. India is very economically complex. We make everything and do everything. We don't always do it well. We don't always do it at scale. But that really is our opening balance for the next 20, 30 years. If you think about the 5 labor market transitions that, at least I think of development as 5 labor market transitions, right? Farm to non-farm, rural to urban, subsistence self-employment to wage employment, school to work, and informal enterprises to formal enterprises. So why does India get killed with productivity? Because we have 63 million enterprises. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million work from home. Only 8.5 million pay the mandatory GST indirect tax we introduced. Only 1 million pay the mandatory Social Security. There are only 19,000 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than $1.5 million. So 63 million enterprises means jack shit if it translates to 19,000 companies with a paid-up capital of 1.5. So I would submit, while technology is a very important opportunity for India to leapfrog, for India to go from $1,500 to $8,000, we just need to focus on formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital. You know, the bleeding edge of technology is important for us. Maybe we'll never get to $45,000 per capita. Maybe 30 is the new 45 because of all this. But for India to get to 1,500 to 8,000, we can't let ourselves off the hook on just getting rid of regulatory cholesterol, improving human capital, and fixing sort of the infrastructure, which is the biggest assassinator of productivity anyway. So I would think about productivity very different in India than the OECD would think about it, at least for the next, what should we do? We're not trying to describe the world, we're trying to change it. and so the next steps for us would not really be to be very threatened by technology. We will get there, but for a country sort of where half our labor force produces 13% of our GDP, I would say at this point it's really more of an opportunity than a threat.
Thank you. And Yao, if I can turn to you to share thoughts about artificial intelligence, robotics.
Yes. Actually, I like to also start by sharing, like who I am and why I'm here, and then we'll see like why I want to talk about robots today at this great forum here in India. So I'm a woman entrepreneur in tech from Silicon Valley, founder of Roboterra. It's an educational robotics company founded about 4 years ago. But before this, I actually started my first company when I was studying, when I was doing my PhD at Columbia. And then that company was building a software for American universities, which brought me to build my first 2 teams actually in India. So I've had a lot of experiences of working in India with talent here, direct experiences of actually comparing the professional quality of actually Indian professionals versus professionals in China, because I personally grew up in China, and then the international students from China and India are working along with each other, but also competing in many fields together in American grad schools. So there are always those interesting conversations asked by Chinese students. There are so many things Indian students are doing great. What can we learn from them, about them? So that's really the background I want to mention. Having worked with Indian colleagues, really seeing that there are a lot of things worth, to be learned by the Chinese professionals. I want to mention that having actually a lot of, I wouldn't use a word directly, brain drain, but really actually aspiring students who are all from different family backgrounds. They were educated by schools here, but then worked hard enough, and then get the chance to study abroad, and then if the country is able to create the right policy environment to support, actually, as we all know, that the Prime Minister Modi is doing a lot of great work of supporting firms to develop, and then also creating the environment for startups to flourish in India now, so that you can really bring back the great talents who will bring both capital, technology, and also jobs. That drives innovation and then drives many new things to happen. So I think, on this note, again, as a Chinese, China-born entrepreneur working in Silicon Valley, especially in recent 5 years, I would say, the amount of capital from the Chinese investments into the U.S., actually focusing on the Chinese innovation sector or the entrepreneurs, is huge. And a direct effect on that is actually bringing a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs returning to China. Why? Because the market is very huge, and with a great understanding of the demand there, and then bridging the gap of more advanced technology developed in the US or in other parts of the world and bring back to China. That is opportunity for both the entrepreneurs and also for the workforce in the home country as well. And then we are definitely seeing similar trends for Indian entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley as well. That's one thing, I think definitely worth encouraging for the home country's policy consideration as well. Another note I want to mention is, I guess, a little bit different perspectives in terms of, so when we're thinking about policy, especially for education and human capital today, I think for an entrepreneur, fundamentally, we're just extremely optimistic about the future. The internet today is 50 years old. And this thing, the iPhone, was launched 10 years ago. And I think, for all of us sitting in this room, we've been either working on technology or really in the policy world, knowing what's going on, being basically on top of the information tower. However, who could have forecasted all the development of mobile apps and how the apps actually together are changing our lives today? So there's no such terms yet, but I'd like to just invent a term today. It's a micro innovation, and then become the ecosystem together. Will actually have a collective beyond imagination effect, and then we call it exponential development. So together we all know that the trend is upward, is exponential. But what does that mean? That means we know the trend is upward, developing. We just don't know what exactly it means in terms of what new jobs will be created. For example, even for Silicon Valley, jobs that was product management almost doesn't really exist 10 years ago. But today, or even artificial AI product manager, right? There's no such jobs. The ones who actually have to connect, for example, labor-intensive data cleaner group together with data scientists, together with software engineers. Those manager jobs just doesn't exist before. So with innovations happening, we actually couldn't really tell what jobs will be created tomorrow. But we can tell the bigger trends. The bigger trends are, as long as we can work together, continuously have the dialogues, opening up to collaborate, to provide the peaceful development environment for all nations, then we will know, and hopefully the thing will happen sooner, that for the high schoolers today who are 15 years old, when they are working professionals, right, in 10 to 15 years, that is basically 2030s. There will be humans on Mars already, because not only NASA or the other private sector companies, SpaceX, but also the Chinese Space Agency and also the Indian Space Agency all announced Human on Mars initiative, or sending rovers on Mars in 2030s. So that's a symbol, or symbolic technological development that along that way, all those nation players or private players will have external positive tech impact to have spillover effects of what's developed for space tech. But those spillover effects will just affect the development of civilian tech, of private tech sector. So many new jobs will be created based on the new data transmission, data processing, telecommunication technologies with this development. So of course, data is the new oil. Processing it will dependent on a lot of the AI algorithms, and then those algorithms and technology will empower many products and shape a lot of sectors that will negatively impact the workforce today, but also create new opportunities for tomorrow. So that's, that in the very end, I just want to mention, that's really the belief and the mission that my team at Roboterra, that we hold tightly. The belief is about this upward direction and trend, and also the belief in human spirit. So with the development of AI and robots, yes, the robots are going to do a lot of the repetitive and dirty work kind of jobs, but what will still make humans human in that area? And we believe that will be the human spirit, that is creativity and curiosity. Curiosity will come up with new solutions, will always disrupt what's in existence, but it will also come up with new ideas. And then in Silicon Valley, people who are doing things with that spirit are entrepreneurs and then engineers and all the people. And I just believe with AI and robotic development, either we want to see more jobs created in the service sector. The fundamental spirit is actually human-centric, to really for and by the human curiosity. And then that's the design principle that we hold tightly and wanted to encourage the policy making sector and also all educators to join us as well, to be human-centric. Thank you.
Thank you, Yao. I'm going to ask a few follow-up questions before opening up the discussion to our audience. Minister, if I can start with you and just pick up on something that you said. I think you mentioned that education. You rightly mentioned that education creates expectations amongst those who receive it. And if we can use the framework that Gabriela spoke about in terms of policies, skills, and standards, can you share with us some of the initiatives that your government is undertaking in these areas to meet those expectations?
We have a wide variety of initiatives underway when you look at employability, and that of course includes education, skill development, as well as helping people find jobs. So the whole area of employability has been a very important focus area because we recognize that we have to find a way of gainfully employing all of these young people. In education, there are a host of different initiatives, starting with improving the quality of education in primary schools, providing them more resources, more facilities, obviously teacher training when you get to high school and so on, and then some very innovative ideas in higher education, such as freeing up 20 universities so that they can compete against world-leading universities, transforming the way medical education is done, transforming the way engineering education is done. So a whole host of initiatives as far as higher education is concerned. And then when it comes to skilling and entrepreneurship, we have created a whole new ministry and a variety of different programs to be able to build up skills, working in deep partnership with employers to be able to do that. We've studied apprenticeship programs around the world. In the aviation ministry, just today we held an open house for aircraft maintenance engineers to understand how we can better skill them, certify them, provide them apprenticeship opportunities. So in every sector, we are working on skilling and having a trained workforce. And then, of course, we are trying to do a lot in terms of matching employers with skilled people so that the jobs, in fact, get created and we are able to gainfully employ people. And finally, I will say is that on the financing side, we have a very innovative program called the Mudra Yojana. And the idea of the Mudra Yojana is to make microloans through the financial system without any guarantees or any collateral so that people can get 50,000 rupees, 100,000 rupees, small loans, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, so that they can open their beauty parlor, they can open their mobile repair shop, they can get a bunch of hens and start, a small chicken business, a cow, a dairy business, etc. So we are trying to encourage micro-entrepreneurship through these kinds of microloans as well. So across the board, we are working on all of these different dimensions of employability. And of course, when it comes to industry and ease of doing business, all those things are underway as well because that's where the demand gets created for the skilled workforce. So it's just a galaxy of different initiatives that are underway.
Thank you, Minister. Gabriela, if I can come to you, I had the opportunity actually just last month to chat with Andreas Schleicher at your organization about the many education insights that come out of his and his team's work. And when we talked, when we came to the area of skills, and when the OECD talks about skills, you're talking essentially about what we would broadly in the education space call global citizenship type skills. They're really skills that are quite generic, and that make you make someone essentially adaptive, capable of adapting, capable of essentially becoming a lifelong learner. What can the OECD, through its experience and best practice, understanding of best practices, tell us? Is there a country out there? Is there an economy that is doing the skills thing well? That has created an adaptive workforce, and if so, what are they doing right?
That's too big of a question, huh? Because the reality, it depends on how you define skills. As I said before, if the education systems for the last decades have been, and I have to accept that it was also out of the PISA influence, had been focusing a lot on very basic cognitive skills. And that's what we measure, because this is something that we had to develop some standardized tests that will make comparable insights among countries. And therefore, the easiest thing was to do, okay, let's go for maths, let's go for science, and let's go for literacy. The reality is that I think that we had a very reductionist view of what is the human being and what are the needs of human being in this multicultural world. And as I said, a fast-changing world. And I have to say that also not only related to the digital world, but related to the increased nationalism sentiments, the kind of intolerance that we have been seeing to anything that is foreign, the kind of inward-looking trends that we are perceiving in so many countries. We relaunched the debate of what do we mean by skills and what kind of skills should human beings have. And then you get to very complex set of issues, because it's not only about citizenship. I think that education for citizenship encompasses the kind of issues that has to do with ethics, it has to do with good judgment, it has to do with agency, to understand that you can impact the world and you also have this capacity to influence your own environment. But it's beyond that. Because the reality is that in the world that we live, you need to have some other elements embedded in the human learning process that has to do with empathy, with the capacity to understand others' points of view, to put yourself confronting different perspectives, and not to immediately close yourself because you have all the answers. And I have to say that I'm leading in the OECD an initiative that is new approaches to economic challenges. Because you're right, for many years, we built up an image of the human being, of being an homo economicus. And then the markets will provide all the answers, and then we had all the answers and the economic models that we built up. I actually also was in the Kennedy School, and so we were trained, not educated, we were trained in how to follow certain models and certain paradigms. This all has changed. This all has changed because of the crisis. This all has changed because of the lack of trust. This all has changed because of these very unilinear kind of education systems that we have been building. So how to move from there, and that's why our global competencies framework that we just launched last December is broader than citizenship. I think that it has to do with the capacity of children to understand themselves. And
Gabriela, let me just interject here, because I think Stavros has teed up a very interesting question, and you're moving towards giving us an interesting way of looking at it. But I think the way to sharpen that particular question is as follows, and maybe we can open it up just now, because then we can have a bit more of a free-for-all and give you more entertainment, as you were promising, Stavros, earlier. But I think for the advanced countries, which is what OECD represents, the really interesting question is, can skills catch up? And what I mean by that is, you're of course working on the comprehensive skill framework and all the things you're doing to improve education and skills. But technology is moving so fast and it's being concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Are we going to, as a result of that, inevitably concentrate income, wealth in a very small group of people, drive up inequality, and in a way never be able to catch up as far as skills are concerned? What's the OECD's view on that?
Minister, I think you interrupted me when I was building that argument, and I want to correct you, because the OECD is not about advanced economies. I am Mexican. I wish that Mexico joining the OECD became an advanced economy, but it's not. The whole point that I was building up is that when children are taught to understand themselves and the world that surrounds them, which is very complex, they will be able to master their own learning processes. And that's what we need to do. The fact that you are able to go for adapting yourself and your learning processes is the basis for lifelong learning. And this is something that we have not embedded in the education systems that are only providing information in a world where information is always there. You don't need to teach children information. You need to, or to repeat the data or to understand the historical facts. You need to provide them with the capacities to discriminate a very rich information world and also to master their own learning processes. So the global competencies is about that. And you are right. The education systems that can be mastering this kind of understanding, I have to say there is no one doing it. I have to say that the PISA survey, of course, is delivering always China and Australia and Canada and Korea and Japan, which are very good at producing the kind of skills that we have in the market, very fast-paced and very adaptive skills. But they are not producing these other skills that I'm thinking about. And it's also related to, as I said at the beginning, having children that can understand the world they live in and understanding they have something to do to improve it. This is going to provide us with the basis for competitive economies, but it's not only about that. For more tolerant societies, for more empathetic societies, and for something that actually probably will deliver better than all these very unequal distribution of wealth, income, and opportunities that we have nowadays.
If I can just quickly ask Joseph, I just want to pick up on a comment first that Manish made. Essentially, Manish, I think you were arguing that for India, you still have work to do in getting the basics right. You know, debottlenecking bureaucracy, building up your infrastructure, and investing in human capital. My question to Joseph is, to what extent, what leapfrogging opportunities are offered by the blockchain technology that you've been so passionate, a passionate exponent of?
Thank you. Quite a wide variety. We saw tremendous growth because of the internet technology and the World Wide Web technology. Web 1.0 gave us simple static text and images and hyperlinks and caused economic growth. Web 2.0 brought in interactivity, e-commerce, mobile, social, and created a new kind of economy, orders of magnitude of economic activity. Web 3.0, which we're just at the cusp of, the decentralized World Wide Web, a World Wide Web that is accomplished by projects like Ethereum for trusted transactions and automated agreements, but other kinds of platforms similar to Ethereum or for decentralized storage or bandwidth or heavy compute. That kind of technology is going to enable us to reshape how businesses offer services to consumers, which is often in an adversarial relationship. It's going to reshape how collectives, how groups of people come together to solve their own problems. I've started calling these things global villages, where people can use decentralized governance tools and crowd fundraising activities and define their focuses, define their goals, raise capital for those things, and execute their projects and solve their goals. And I think decentralized governance, overlapping global villages with lots of different topical focuses will hopefully enable us to solve some of the big problems in the world. So Web 3.0, I think, is going to be a multi orders of magnitude economic driver. Beyond that, we're going to see Web 4.0, which we've been calling the machine economy. So Web 3.0 enables things like natively digital money and identity, and it will be mostly human focused. Web 4.0 will enable machines to interact with one another, machines to have agency in agreements and in monetary transfers. So I think that's going to be another tremendous driver. I believe that the machines do indeed act in service of people, and I think we will continue to shape it that way. And I think it'll be wonderful when machines are able to clothe us and feed us and shelter us, doing the heavy labor that many of us maybe don't want to do, and free us up to do things that we do want to do, things like education, things like entertainment. The festival economy around the world is growing exponentially. And so the siloed nature of business is evolving. Identity in the world is hopefully evolving. Identity in both the developed and the developing world is broken. We spray aspects of our identity across the internet. They get stored on corporate servers and monetized by corporations, and that's in the developed world. That's the good situation. In the developing world, there are many people, a couple billion, who don't have persistent portable identity, who don't have financial relationships. And so a self-sovereign identity construct on a public blockchain will enable people in the developed world to control their own attributes, the aspects of their identity. They will be encrypted. They will be granularly disclosable in situations they designate. We've built a system, an open source system called Uport that accomplishes that. In the developing world, so in the developed world, you'll be able to link that identity to existing identity providers like governments, like your bank manager, for instance. They can attest to the fact that you're a citizen, or they can attest to the fact that you have an account in good standing. In the developing world, it'll be more profound. If you don't have access to those identity providers, you'll be able to use your social context and reputation systems to establish persistent identity and persistent portable reputation, and maybe use that to reach across the world into a micro-lending context, and maybe purchase equipment and bootstrap your business and your presence in the emerging decentralized global economy. We do have many different job functions in our company that you couldn't explain to somebody 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. And so I think there are going to be so many opportunities in education, in gaming. We're going to see an explosive economy. Instead of centralized businesses offering services to consumers, we're going to, from our identity construct, interact in n-sided markets with many different actors in different roles. Those n-sided markets, I would call them open platforms. They will be protocol driven, and none of the actors on those n-sided markets will be overly dominating, overly monetizing the way certain kinds of businesses are. So look forward to a decentralized world where many different kinds of actors can be self-sovereign and can be in control of their own economic destiny on these open platforms.
Thank you. If Manish and, because we're running out of time, so if Manish and Yao will indulge me, I want to offer the opportunity to our audience to ask a few questions. I think I could probably take 4 or 5 questions at one time, and then I'll direct them to the panelists. I don't know if we have mics but I think if it's a small enough room that hopefully people can project. Oh, we have mics. Great. All right. Let me start with over here, and then over there, and then Zina.
Hello, sir.
The lady first, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentations. I really appreciated it. A few of you touched on sort of, changing the paradigm, completely turning everything on its head. And I'm wondering, with the technological shifts that we're seeing, what's the opportunity to completely flip the gender dimension of our lives along with this? I know, Gabriella, you referred to gender while you were speaking, and Yao, obviously, from your position, what you're doing. And Joseph, you talked about, how, look, we don't have to occupy Wall Street. This is the revolution. Likewise, could this be something like dismantling the patriarchy, to use a similar kind of a phrase? And I guess a follow-up question to that would be, is your robot male?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I'll take a few more.
So my question is, there's a diversified field experts in here and some policymakers. So when we are coming with automation, we are coming with robotics, we are coming with artificial intelligence, deep data mining, everything is okay. But the question is that when we have it, if you take the Asia, we have huge population who are working right now. If you see even China, because of automation or robotics, lots of people are losing jobs. And this will be a tremendous problem in the nearest future. So new technology is always welcome. There is no issue with that. But the people who are staying in there, who are in job, they are losing their job. They have to feed their family. There is something problem, sustainable development. How you want to tackle it? What will be the process or the roadmap you want to suggest, along with all of your specialty, that you want to tackle this issue in future, so that it won't be a disaster? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Let's go to the. Okay, well, I'll take a question from you, and then right at the back of the room there.
Mr. Lubin, I also had a question about the gender breakdown. I read somewhere recently that 95% of the Bitcoin wealth is in the hands of men, something along those lines. And then you notice that a lot of these virtual assistants are women, the way you have a female secretary. I was wondering if you could talk about the interaction or the role of governments, because they are trying to take steps to regulate cryptocurrencies, and they're talking a lot about it, and what the interaction ideally is between government regulation or state actors and these decentralized networks.
It's a great question. And at the back there, if we can get a... All right. It seems that the one who has the mic gets to speak.
One mic to rule them all. I'll make it quick. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I have two questions. One is for Minister Sinha. You speak about encouraging sort of these freelance jobs, these gig economy jobs. You mentioned Ola. I have to say, these are pretty terrible jobs. Like, these are not the kind of things that we should be encouraging. We should be finding a way to, we're allowing them, but also that's not what our policy should be about. The policy should be actually thinking how to protect people in these jobs, I believe, and sort of creating a structure of social safety and so on around these gig economy jobs. So how do you think that this would be sort of on your agenda? The other question is for Joseph. And allow me to be a little provocative here. I was reading an article recently about how this year is the 10th year anniversary of Satoshi's white paper. And the article was suggesting that, well, in 10 years, the idea has been around, and there's been a lot of talking about its potential, but not much really has happened with it, aside from creating an instrument for speculation. And the argument was that, well, maybe we're not moving to that sort of decentralized ledger peer-to-peer network because people are perfectly happy with intermediaries as they are. So I wonder if you have a comment on this. That'd be interesting to hear a perspective. Thank you.
Okay. Can we get a mic to the gentleman at the back? He's been trying to get got a question, and then this will be the last question this round, and then we'll come back.
So Manish mentioned that India actually has a wages problem. I think it also has a skill wage premium problem, where there is no wage premium for skilled people. And that in turn leads to kind of an aspiration issue for youth. No youth in India wants to go to a vocational job profile, which, as Minister Sir said, the expectation of the coming youth is to get a white-collar job. So how do you think that technology can help solve this problem of skill wage premium in India?
Thank you for the question. Okay, Yao, do you want to tackle flipping the gender dimension?
Or the robot is a boy, right?
And you know, I think that's a sort of follow-up question to that comment.
Yes. So whether there were biases in actually those technological products we're having or upcoming is on the concerns of product people, business people, and also policymakers. So I've been serving as a council member on the Global Future Council of AI and Robotics. So there are basically scholars, policymakers, and also large corporation or startup CEOs, 20 of us at the World Economic Forum. So just as how many recent studies reviewed, right, there are AI algorithms actually either just couldn't tell dark skin colors, so that it basically fails on some of the claimed effects it want to have if it's a health-based AI, or there are questions or features that the AI's algorithm not sensitive enough if it's gender-based. Well, one big reason because a lot of the algorithms were developed by the Caucasian white male software engineers. So that was, concerned already. And then now people are basically thinking, how can we really, on both policy level and also, practice level, how can we really form the practice guidelines from the education of engineers to product people to policy making, to build basically inclusive technology for all. So I think this is already the beginning, the moment when we start to ask such questions. And the actions are, for example, engaging more girls into the traditionally very less represented engineering majors, the STEM fields, and then more women into tech jobs, into product jobs, management jobs, and then so the more balanced view in those tech development can happen, because otherwise it's just empty, calling for things. So yeah, so I would say there's a start of that already. And then another thing, I think social behaviorally, yes, indeed, because of historical reasons, many of the voice assistants that's AI-based tech are female voices because of there are definitely the historical gender roles played there. But for example, the robot in front of me, I couldn't really demo it today, but its connected robots can be controlled by anyone from anywhere in the world from a robotic, connected robot platform. So it's interesting if you have such a thing at home. You tend to see that people will start to interact through the robot with you in their own role, and then you will interact back. So basically, either it's a robot or AI. What people really need is still the fundamental needs on the Maslow pyramids. The need of companion, need of to solve loneliness problem and all that. So I think it'll be a user design UX question. If there's a bigger market for women, for example, in certain type of robots like that does certain type of jobs, then the robots probably will be more male oriented. So it'll be specific UX question.
Can I add a point to that?
Can I just get the minister to respond? I think we may lose you in a little while. So if I can get you to respond to the question around, technology will cost jobs, and I think it's sort of irresponsible not to factor that in, and the fact that a lot of the new jobs that have been created don't offer the same level of security, satisfaction, and pride that some of the old manufacturing jobs used to.
No, that's
How do we deal with that?
That's an excellent question, and of course, as far as the gig economy is concerned, or these kinds of jobs are concerned, where you're effectively working as an independent contractor, obviously the rich benefits package that you got in a traditional manufacturing job, you will not be able to get. And I think exactly to your point, sir, it's very important for government and policymakers to step in and to ensure that everybody has access to a reasonable social security package. And that social security package includes free health care. It, of course, includes free education. It includes unemployment assistance, as well as insurance of various kinds. And this has been one of the major initiatives of our government, where we built a social security platform so that everybody is covered and everybody gets a reasonable level of social security, and at least is able to secure their life to a basic level. Beyond that, of course, it depends on their earnings. They can buy riders, they can buy supplemental insurance, they can participate in pension programs and so on. But that then becomes self-funded as opposed to being funded through a social security scheme. But increasingly, we will have to work through variations of that. Obviously, in advanced countries, there's already a discussion underway around universal basic income as a floor income for everyone. But I think in poorer developing countries like India, we will not be able to afford much when it comes to universal basic income. But certainly in terms of social security, we should be able to provide a reasonable package to every single Indian citizen.
Joseph, okay, I'll come back very briefly. Is blockchain an instrument of speculation in the hands of the patriarchy?
No. Certainly there are lots of men in the space. It's a tech space, and the early participants have been largely male. Our company it has a much better balance than most companies in the space. I'd like to answer that question from a societal structural perspective. We have been designing infrastructure, laboring under infrastructure for thousands of years that is built according to the organizing principle of hierarchical top-down command and control. And whatever the paradigm is, that sort of rigid infrastructure is going to reinforce the paradigm. So even if we're very eager to change, it makes it difficult to change. We have wrapped the world in communication networks, instantaneous communication networks. We have built a new technology, a technology that enables groups of people, different actors with cooperating and competing agendas to come into consensus with one another in the Bitcoin system every 10 minutes, on the Ethereum platform every 14 seconds, and soon every 5 seconds. So we are building infrastructure that enables us to form consensus more easily. Top-down command and control is the correct paradigm when communication is slow and expensive and decision-making is slow, expensive, and difficult. But with these new technologies, we can move to a much more agile paradigm, a much less rigid paradigm. We can communicate well, communicate richly and immediately, and we can form consensus as often as possible. It strikes me that hierarchical top-down command and control is innately masculine, whereas communication and consensus formation is probably a little more feminine.
Thank you for that. Gabriela, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I think that he's stereotyping. And so I'm sorry, but the fact is that, you know what happened is that the reality is that it's a pity that the minister had to leave, because one thing is very clear. The development in the ICT world is highly concentrated. It's not only about the usage of technology, which is what we have been talking about, except for Zhao Zhang, but it's who are developing these technologies. And that's very highly, highly concentrated. I think that the highest number of patents are in the US. Probably China is trying to advance, and India has some interesting developments, but I have to tell you that the ITC expert in the OECD is always telling me that if any one of those of GAFA was European, we might be less concerned. But the fact is all the platform companies, the big platform companies are US, and it is related to the fact that they have an environment that is very business-oriented, very daring, very risk-taking, all these things. But it's a male world, and it's a white male world, all the developments, and it has to do with the stereotyping. Because the fact is that since early childhood, you have certain roles, and we have documented that. The fact that women do not go to STEM, don't go to engineering, we have it completely mapping out. To the PISA test that we did 5 years ago, we added some questions to the girls, and self-confidence is lower, by far. It's just a fact. Even high-performing girls, when you ask them, are you good in maths? And they're good. 30% will say yes. Whereas if you ask boys in the same cohort, 60% will say yes. So it's a question of self-confidence. Second stage, when you ask girls, are you going to choose engineer or mathematics, or no, that's for boys. And parents will say the same. No, I don't want my girl to go to engineering because that's for boys. And so it's really preventing girls to get into this area. And if you get to the next stage, which is not only STEM, but the ICT world, very few women choose those disciplines. So I think that this is a question of stereotyping. I completely agree with you. STEM, we need to, there's a policy angle there that we need to do. There are many countries that have avoided having gender stereotyping in textbooks. It's very important. Training teachers not to go for the pink and sweet and blue and strong for it, this kind of thing. So I think this is getting women behind. But then let me just add another element of the quality jobs. It's also a gender debate, because if you ask my social policy experts, they will say, oh my God, this gig economy is awful because you're really not having the collective bargaining power you had before. The quality of contracts is not the same. You are left alone in front of this employer that you don't even know who he is, and there is no social dialogue. All these things are things that we really need to think about, because we need to build something that replaces what is going to be disappearing. But the fact is also that if you ask the ICT people, they're very optimistic, and the fact that, my God, this is really going to provide a very agile world in which the fact is that you can work whenever you want to work and the areas you want to work, and then make your own money, and then you think of the universal basic income, so world will be fine. And for women will be great. But the reality is that the quality of those jobs for women are not so good. Yes, they provide with more, how do you call it, flexibility in terms of scheduling, but it's not so good. I think that these are the issues that we need to think, not only for women, but I think in general, for all these new jobs that have been created. Some of them might be great, but then the other part, which is very important, who is developing these technologies, and why is it so highly concentrated in certain countries?
Thank you. Manish, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to the question on the skills wage premium problem, but then also maybe take an opportunity just to reflect on the discussion that we've had as it relates to India.
So I would disagree. I think the wage premium in the Indian economy does exist. It's not as big as it should be. It's not as pervasive as it should be. But we have, we've hired 1.6 million people in the last 10 years, and they have been at a wage premium. I think what you're talking about is there a school wage premium, a skill wage premium, and a college wage premium? I think there is a school wage premium, the 3 R's and the 4th R of relationships. So reading, writing, arithmetic, soft skills is I mean, China's farm to non-farm happened to factories. India's farm to non-farm is happening to sales. Not even to services. It's sales, it's domestic consumption. So there is a school wage premium. I think is there a college wage premium? I think one of the most interesting questions which India is struggling with right now is how many of our kids should go to college, right? College isn't what it used to be globally. The world has produced more graduates in the last 35 years than the 800 years before that. So what does that mean? It means 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree. 31% of retail sales clerks in the US have a college degree. 15% of high-end security guards in India have a college degree. But college matters. Let's not patronize. Vocational training is usually for other people's children. It's not for our children. Jayant went to Harvard. She went to Harvard. Harvard is a good place to be at, but it's a better place to be from. Right? The fundamental value is being from Harvard, which is a gift which keeps giving all your life. So we're struggling with this whole social signaling value of college and the wage premium of college not matching up, which is why we're trying vocational universities, we're trying apprenticeship programs and stuff like that. But I would say that now, and that's why this formalization of India is so important. We do not need 63 million enterprises. Most of them are built on regulatory arbitrage. If you want a modern, productive economy, we're going to have to, if you want a wage premium to emerge in the economy, you're going to have to formalize India, which is why demonetization, GST, real estate law, RERA, bankruptcy are all related. The common thread here is that regulatory arbitrage should become difficult. We've had a sense of humor about the rule of law, which has to go because it's been killing our productivity, right? So, in the last sort of 10, 15 years, if you followed a rule in India, you felt like you missed a deal. I mean, we need to move from, deals to rules. And deals to rules is where the wage premium emerges. So I would say that we finally have a plan for the wage premium, and I think it's quite pervasive.
Well, we are, I'm afraid, out of time. In fact, we've run over our allotted time. So I want to thank the audience for your participation and input to this discussion, and of course our distinguished panelists. Please join me in thanking them.